Tim.
And I met Tim. Tim was kind of my work mentor in 2019 before the pandemic hit. And, you know, I was kind of, because our boss at the time was in Halifax, he was just like, oh yeah, if you got any problems, call Tim or email Tim. I'm like, okay. So Tim right away, I knew through email exchange that I was going to get along with him because he was just like, yeah, I do this, but I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if this will work for you. Try this. You know? So it was like, okay, I can. This is how things go. It's all played by ear. But anyway, Tim was a big help. And so yeah, like I said, it's the first time meeting Tim in the flesh. So it's good. And I know, you know, everybody knows. Like he has. How long has your YouTube channel been going?
9 years.
9 years. Yeah. And it's primarily classic rock, isn't it? Yeah. So he's the expert on classic rock, as you know. And I follow his Facebook updates and whatnot. But yeah, that's how I know Tim. And I know he's a speed writer like we all are at work. You know, I know he can write a 30-second ad with us. But I also know he's creative too. So kind of to introduce Tim, I found a poem that might be relevant that I wrote in this is my 4th book. It's called Unexpected Mergers. And it's, they're all poems based on an artist's images. Marcel Herms was the artist in the Netherlands. And this one he called Keep Playing That Rock and Roll. So I wrote this, inspired this. Keep playing that rock and roll, however you hear it, whether with paintbrush, keyboard, chisel, or clay. Keep playing that rock and roll. Vibrate your brain with a busy, resonant buzz to avoid overthinking. Keep playing that rock and roll. Inflate your spirit like a Pink Floyd prop, unafraid to illustrate. Keep playing that rock and roll. Don't avoid the crowd pleasers. Once bitten, twice shy hearts need to see their reflections. So, try to throw in a little bit of classic rock in the poem. But yeah, so, I mean, without further ado, welcome Tim up here to chat to us. I apologize to his family who've probably heard this before many times, but I wasn't here. Tim.
That's my whole. That's my. Just give me a kiss. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for all for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you, Jordan, for the opportunity. And like he said, we've been working together for quite a long time, and it's really hard to believe this is the first time we've met face to face with such as modern life working. And Jordan invited me here to do a little reading from a book that is a little over 2 years old at this point, but still something that's very, very special to me and a real passion project. And before I go too much further, I'll hold the book up. It's called Unspooled, an adventure in 8 tracks. If you're too young to know what 8 tracks were, I will show you. I brought props. And before I go too much further, I have to thank this man right here, Matthew Phillips, best friend for 30 plus years, and the man responsible for the wonderful design work and layout in this book. I'm going to talk more about how you can get your hands on a copy of this book later, but you all know what 8-track tapes are? No?
I do.
Okay, you know what cassettes are? Cassette tapes? Listen to. Okay. These are sort of a precursor to that, or they started around the same time. 8 tracks are this very, very clunky medium, as can be evidenced from the cover of this book, which is on my shirt, Jack's shirt. And Matt was just playing some Aerosmith. So this is Aerosmith's greatest hits in 8-track form. This is what it looks like. Whereas a cassette had 2 sides, these had 4 programs. Songs are mixed up. You put them in a clunky machine, either at home or in your car, and hope that they didn't unravel on you and end up looking like I do here. I also want to thank Helga, because Helga is the photographer for this book. So yes, We went through a lot to make this shot happen.
What 8 tracks did you destroy to make that one?
We went to Value Village and Matt purchased some, I'll say some sacrificial lambs. I believe they were all over the country. It may be some easy listening. Certainly not the ones that I brought with me. And I brought a few with me specifically on purpose because they link to the section of the book I'm going to read for you today. When Jordan first asked me to do this, I thought, well, what can I read that's going to make any sense to anyone who's not familiar with me? It's not a very long chapter, but it is a fun memory of something that happened probably, I want to say February, March of 1993. I have a really good friend named Chad Green. Doesn't live around here anymore, but he used to work at the bottle exchange up in Woodstock, and that is a dirty, dingy job. But one day in particular, something kind of cool happened. And incidentally, why collect 8 tracks? Well, I'm a music collector, and I happen to be a collector of formats. And if I like an album, like a band, an artist, I like to find an album in all the formats that are available. 8 tracks are just one of them. The main focus of the book is on collecting, but it also chronicles the fact that who here remembers Columbia House? Okay, if you were a member of Columbia House in the 80s, 8 tracks were available a lot longer than they were just to buy them in stores. That always kind of fascinated me, so that's one of the parts of this book that I wanted to chronicle. That's not what this chapter is about, though. This chapter is called Mistreated, which is named after a Deep Purple song. So I'm going to read from this. Now, Chad himself contributed an earlier chapter, which is why I started this chapter off with "You've already met my old buddy Chad," but you haven't. Some of you have. So my intro to this is I shudder to think how many rare 8 tracks ended up in a landfill before people realized there might be resale value in them. Here's a story of some that got rescued. Chad's one of my few friends who picked up the 8-track collecting bug along with me, and one of my favorite stories making a successful 8-track haul involves him. It may remain the closest I have ever come to an estate sale. Typical Saturday night, 1993, would be us hanging out, listening to tunes, and eating pizza, which still sounds like a pretty fun Saturday night to me. He called me from work that afternoon and said, "You're not going to believe what came into work today." Now, back then, Chad worked at a bottle exchange, and because of Chad, I understood that they have to deal with some nasty stuff sometimes, so he could literally have been referring to anything. Well, it wasn't just anything. After Chad went home to shower, he showed up at my place holding a somewhat tattered garbage bag. As the story goes, a guy in a half-ton truck pulled in the exchange with cases upon cases of empties. As they were unloading the truck, this garbage bag, which was not tied, toppled over. It was full of 8 tracks. One rolled out, facing right side up, and caught Chad's eye like a winged beacon. It was this very one right here, Van Halen 2. Maybe you've heard of it. So, with that, the guy apologized for the mess, said he was on his way to the dump, and I feel the need to explain this. Yes, this was back when there were still public dumps. You could just drive to this ugly, stinky landfill and just throw your garbage in this burning pit. Hard to believe that it was a thing back then. So Chad did the right thing, and he asked if he could take those tapes off his hands. Being at work, he didn't have time to comb through them, but given that there was a Van Halen card, he knew it would be worth diving into that garbage bag. Smart guy, that Chad is. Now, I have to say that, a lot of times, especially back then, it was hard to find these things, and it was really hard to find albums we liked. If you found 8 tracks, they generally tended to be, like I said, old country, easy listening, a lot of various artist tapes, not in-demand titles. You weren't finding rare ones from the later 80s. So after devouring our pizza, we sat down to the serious business of unearthing potential treasures of the filthy garbage bag. Mostly it was stuff we weren't interested in, but we were used to that. But as long as you can get something, like a prospector making a lucky strike, the bag yielded quite a few gems. For many years, this was the greatest single haul of 8 tracks either of us had come across. And in doing so, as Matt's intro music played, Aerosmith's Greatest Hits, which still sells to this day, band, I think, whose music is more popular now than it's ever been, Queen, The Game. One of my favorite bands ever. Rush, Fly By Night. Another one of my favorite bands, although I wasn't a fan of them at the time this happened. Kiss, with a very beat up copy of their album Love Gun. I think there was some masking tape on this, which I tried to remove, which took out part of the cover. Incidentally, I used to have an 8-track player. This has a baseball game recorded over it. First album from Toto, you might know a little song called Hold the Line. It's from this. And of course, the aforementioned Van Halen 2. So, life moved on, as life does, of course, and Chad ended up moving around a lot. So he bequeathed his 8-track finds to me. It was more than just these ones, but to most people, this might sound like the most boring and bizarre way to spend a Saturday night, but for us, it didn't get much better. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
How much are those worth? You said that the Aerosmith one probably still sells in collector's circles.
Well, one of the problems is that I don't have a player anymore. I know it used to work.
Depended on
You know, let's put it this way. If I had to buy these again, I wouldn't be too worried. But when you're getting into, I'll show you a page here that shows just how rare some of these got. And if you grew up in the 80s, you may recognize some of these titles. These are all legitimate 8-track tapes. So there's Michael Jackson Bad, there's the Cocktail soundtrack, there's Madonna, True Blue, Cyndi Lauper, True Colors, the Top Gun soundtrack I think is on here, there's a Prince one on here. So yeah, these actually exist in 8-track form. These are the ones that command hundreds and hundreds of dollars, depending on, you know, a lot of it is how collectible the artist is.
Right.
You know, if people collect Bruce Springsteen, for example. Tunnel of Love came out in 1987, that's on the 8-track. You're gonna pay a pretty penny for that, because it's because of what it is, because of who it is, because of the time period. And I have some sheets of paper here. Anyone is interested in finding out more about this book, originally Matt and I did this as a Kickstarter project. Now it's on Amazon, so you can scan this QR code, it takes you right to the Amazon link, which will let you look inside the book. And again, I have to say just how well this book is designed and how well it looks. And even in the Amazon print on demand, it's not quite as glossy as the original, but it still looks pretty good. So yeah, I'll have those available for anyone that wants them. It's available on Amazon now. And thanks everyone, and thank you Jordan for inviting me.
No problem. Can we ask you some questions?
You can absolutely ask me some questions.
Did you have an 8-track deck in like your parents' car player?
No, Mom and Dad didn't have one. My grandparents had at their home. Someone, an aunt or an uncle, had one in their car. And I also remember the same aunt and uncle had. I tried to chronicle different things about this period, right? Because once they started to disappear from the store shelves, which was around 1982, but someone still had an 8-track deck in their vehicle or at home, the solution was to buy one of these Sparkle-matic 8-track cassette adapters. So this is the size of one of these, but it had an opening here that you dropped a cassette tape down into and shoved it into the player to play the cassette, because all it needs is just something to turn the tape. Very strange construction went into these. There is a chapter that a guy by the name of Bill Flanagan graciously donated his time and wrote for me about how these things actually work. You know, I mentioned Aerosmith before. That's my Aerosmith collection. These are classic albums right here. And you know, like anything, some of them you see more than others. You're not likely to see a lot of these classic rock ones, as I say, in the wild anymore. Let's see, there's a chapter about, well, okay, another thing I wanted to do with this book is chronicle. It's kind of a journey through the 80s for me, because I'm a child of the 80s. So, this is Halloween 1983. I have the Darth Vader costume on. These are the old, like, uncomfortable plastic masks with the elastics that cut into you. Yeah. And my sister was Strawberry Shortcake, and maybe people know who that is now, maybe they don't. But, another one of my favorites is Christmas 1982, my very first Pac-Man console. So do we have any other questions?
So I've never heard an 8-track. Like I've heard cassettes and CDs and records and Spotify now, right?
Right.
But so the sound, how different is it? Because when you play a record, like an LP, there's a little bit of static, right? Which
Yeah,
is
this
kinda cool.
scratches, record
But so
scratches.
what is the sound like?
Well, you're lucky if you get one that has any sound now, but it would be comparable. It would be comparable to a cassette. Now, the reason that these are called 8 tracks is because, as I said, instead of having 2 sides, they're split into 4 programs. So there are 4 stereo tracks. 4 times 2 is 8. So you can see how narrow the tape is inside one of these. Split that into 4, and that's each of the 4 programs. So you've only got a little tiny strip of tape that has all of the music on it. And when it reached the end of a program, you either advanced it yourself or it would make this sound, this sound, advance to the next program. So the tape inside the machine would literally make a quarter turn. Now you're listening to another song. Now what would inevitably happen, gears would slip, these things weren't built to last. Because they were so small, inevitably you'd get the crosstalk phenomenon, which is where you'd hear 2 songs at the same time. That would happen. Another thing that these 8 tracks are notorious for is songs that broke halfway through, switched programs, and then the next program started up, here comes the rest of the song, would fade back in. The reason they had to do this is because they tried to keep the 4 programs as equal in length as possible. That is so. One other quirky thing about these is that you could not rewind 8 tracks, you could only fast forward them. So if you wanted to hear a particular song, it wasn't as simple as just advancing to the next program, because if you were, say, 1 song in on program 1 and you wanted to go to the beginning of program 2 and you hit the program change button, now you're in the 2nd song of program 2. It's the same, if you're 3 minutes in, that's where you're going to be in the next program. So, so you may be thinking, why? Why do these exist? These were the first portable medium of music. This provided freedom for people that wanted to listen to exactly what they wanted to listen to anytime, anywhere, especially in their vehicle. You couldn't very well take a record player and put it in your vehicle. Cassettes, like audio cassettes, were of poorer quality than they would become, so they didn't last very long at all. These were of better quality, and it was very simple to install a player. They actually started in 1964, I think I've got this right, by Learjet. So music would play over the, you were on a plane. And eventually they ended up being, sold to retail. Like all things, they ran their course, and like I said, they stopped making them for retail sale. Somewhere around 1982, there are a handful from 1983. But the record clubs, the home record clubs, Columbia House and RCA Music Service continued to make certain titles available all the way through 1988. Now, I first read that in the mid-90s. One of the first times I was able to go online. I always wondered when they stopped making them, but when I realized they made them all the way through 1988, I thought, boy, it'd be nice to have a book about this. What was the question? How did they sound? Yes. Yeah, if you had a good player and you took care of it, and when I say take care of it, I mean just that. There are folks that to this very day will take a player, refurbish it, they'll take it apart, they'll oil it, they'll clean all of the little gears and the cap stands and all the parts that make it run. They'll take the tapes apart, they'll change the felt pads, and it takes a lot of maintenance. I'm not cut out for that. And if you do that, you can actually get a pretty full sound out of these things. But yeah, there's always the chance. These things were notorious for, coiling up inside the machine. And if you weren't careful and took it out just the right time, there'd be more tape inside the machine than there would be inside the cartridge. So, yeah, not very reliable, but there's just something about seeing iconic artwork on one of these things that I find fascinating. And was glad I was able to chronicle it and put it in book form. But if I had just done a list of these titles, because each year in this book, I have a list of all known ones. These are confirmed to exist. But if I'd just done that, it might be dry. It might be dry reading. There's some really fun stories in here that people have contributed. I've written quite a few. But if you've ever collected anything, if you've ever had that collecting bug, you'll find something to enjoy in this book.